Thank you, Marcia. So, as Marcia said, I'm Jessica Ryall-Spoor and I work for the Public Protection Partnership. So, just to give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour of what the Public Protection Partnership do. So we provide environmental health and trading standard services and licensing services to West Berkshire and Bracknell Forest, and we also provide trading standard services across Woking Borough Council as well. I sit and my team sit within the trading standards team within the Public Protection Partnership, and I lead on the fraud and scams victim support that we provide to the 3 local authorities. This provision of support that we provide is actually funded, so it's not kind of a statutory service that the Public Protection Partnership provide. We're funded through the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner through their community safety funds, which are delegated to the community safety partnerships across the local authorities, and then from that I put in bids for this piece of work to be undertaken across the local authorities. Fraud and scams and the support that is being provided to victims is one of the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner's strategic priorities at the moment. So it's a service that we have got funding for the next 3 years to deliver across the 3 local authorities. Without further ado, I will share my presentation with you. And as Marcia said, if you have any questions, if you can pop them in the chat, and then Marcia is going to facilitate all those sort of functions for me. So hopefully I will share my screen and it will all go to plan. Hopefully you can all see that. I'm going to take the silence as you can. So you're here today to learn about fraud and scams, no blame, no shame. So the purpose of this session is to take you through the latest information from the National Trading Standards Scams team in relation to fraud and scams. So it's around how perpetrators of this type of crime operates, how the language we use as professionals can support victims of this type of crime, and how we within the fraud and scams team within Public Protection Partnership can support yourselves as professionals and support people that you come into contact with in managing the impact and effects of fraud and scams. So we're here basically to prevent and protect residents from this type of crime. And what we find is that society often blames victims of fraud and scams and shames them into silence through the language we use and the lack of support law enforcement and agencies provide. We often hear terms like they fell for a scam, even within in the news and things like that. Oh, this victim fell for the scam. So it's putting the blame on the victim, saying, well, they should have known better. They must have been really stupid to have done that, rather than actually, they've had a crime committed against them and they are a victim of a crime and they require that support and that use of language that treats them as if they are, as the victim that they rightly are. So by acknowledging that fraud and scams are committed by criminals and not blaming or shaming victims by our language and approach, we can then ensure victims are better supported, less likely to be victimised again, and more likely to report the crime. So what is a fraud or scam? So the dictionary definition is obviously the wrongful or criminal deception intended to result in financial or personal gain, a dishonest scheme or fraud. And we use the terms fraud and scams interchangeably, but essentially the main objective of both is to either get the victim to part with enough information, their personal information that enables a criminal to use it to get the victim's money, or for the victim to part with their own money. So, you think of things like scams on the internet. So your ones email scams, text scams, phone call scams. Often they might be asking for personal information from the victim. They'll be asking, they'll say, oh, we need to get onto your computer click this link or something like that. And what they're doing is they're then trying to get into their computers or get their information to be able to take their money. Or they will use tactics where they get the victim to be able to go to the bank or to go on to provide their money via a bank transfer online or via telephone, for example. So just some key statistics. So according to the Crime Survey for England and Wales in 2023, 1 in 17 UK adults were victims of fraud in the space of 12 months. So that might not sound like a lot, but that's the equivalent of nearly 3 million adults in 2023 alone. And the National Crime Agency now believe that fraud makes up for about 38% of all crime. So it's a massive issue. National Trading Standards scams data suggests that 73% of UK adults, so equivalent to about 40 million people, have been targeted by scams. So, I'm sure you guys on here today will have had those texts that are purporting to be from somebody that need you all of a sudden to send them some money because they're in some sort of issue, or TikTok scams, or Facebook scams on Facebook Marketplace and stuff like that. All these things, we are in society come into contact with scammers basically trying to take our money on a daily basis sometimes. And unfortunately there are some people that will go through that process and will result in their money being taken. And there are a number of us that obviously will be aware that actually this is a scam, and we don't actually then go along that process. So 35% of all of UK adults, so equivalent of 19 million people, have lost money due to scams within the last 12 months. And despite this, fraud and scams are massively underreported. So the National Crime Agency estimate that only 14% of fraud and scams are reported, and that only 32% of scams and fraud victims reported the crime to authorities, with 66% not even telling a friend or a relative. And very often that is because they feel ashamed. Basically, they feel that they're like, how did that happen to me? I'm normally somebody that's quite switched on about these things. I wouldn't normally think that I was somebody that would be in a situation that this would happen. We're working with a gentleman at the moment who, through an investment scam, has lost over £200,000 of the family's money, and he is in a situation now where his wife doesn't know. They are wanting to sell their house and move into another property, and he's saying, we can't do that. We've got no money, and we're having to assist him with not only dealing with the fact that with that investment fraud, it is likely that he will never get that money back because that money has now gone off to some country, goodness knows where in the world, but also advising his wife that he has lost all their money in what he believed was a genuine investment. So population vulnerabilities. So the UK population is becoming, it's believed, increasingly susceptible to fraud and scams. So we've got a lot of our kind of traditional vulnerabilities, as we would call them, rising. So we've got 9.8 million people in the UK are living with some form of disability. We've got 944,000 having dementia, and 3 million are living with cancer. We've then got 1 in 6 adults has a common mental health disorder, and 1 in 7 have some form of neurodiversity. And all these kind of population vulnerabilities make us more susceptible to coming into contact with people that are going to that want to scam us, and that render us vulnerable to potentially being part of those scams. And a lot of these population vulnerabilities are set to rise. So 1.6 million adults are expected to be living with dementia by 2050, and 5.3 million are expected to be living with cancer by 2040. But we also have situational and marketplace vulnerabilities. So our situational vulnerabilities are generally big life events. such as divorce, bereavement, job loss, illnesses, things that then have an impact on your personal resilience, potentially have an impact on your wealth, impact on your capability to be able to be in the right mindset to think, actually, this this phone call that I've just got, this person that's just knocked my door and told me that I need my that my roof tiles need replacing, and can do it straight away for me for £40. Actually that's not right, that's not correct, that's likely to be a scam. But when we're in these situations where we've got other issues going on, it renders us vulnerable and reduces our resilience to be able to be in a place where we're thinking straight and we're thinking clearly, and we're able to realize that people are potentially trying to scam us. And then we've got technological vulnerabilities. So they can be involving our computer access and computer literacy. They may occur, for example, when we're looking at switching utility providers, or when we're trying to buy a new complex product or service. For example, if we're trying to going to buy a new car, for example, you are situationally vulnerable in that situation. It's probably not something that you do regularly, or buying a house. These are big, life events essentially, which are often events which are targeted by scammers. You go to a car dealership and you don't, for me, for example, I would know nothing about how to buy a car. I go and buy a car every 3 years at a dealership. But if I were to go just a dealership that sells many different cars rather than a particular branded dealership, I wouldn't know whether that car that I was parting my money with was a good, reliable car, or whether they were trying to scam me and take my money. So we have these situational vulnerabilities alongside these marketplace vulnerabilities that render us all vulnerable to being scammed. So the impact of fraud and scams on victims can be devastating. Financially, the National Trade and Standards Scams Team estimate that the average victim loses £1,730 to every scam. But it may be larger still, as the Home Office put the figure closer to around 3,000. So, we're talking a lot of money that is each time a person is scammed, between £1,700 and £3,000. It's a huge amount of money for people to lose. And we have some people that are regularly losing this type of money or more through scams. And we're in a situation where our financial resilience is increasingly tested. We've got a cost of living crisis, so a lot of us can't afford to lose this type of money, and debt is often a consequence of fraud or scams. As I said, with the person that's lost over £200,000 in an investment scam, he no longer can he's having to sell his house and can't afford to buy a new house, because he can't, because of the situation they're in financially now as a result of giving his money into an investment scam. So the consequences of being a victim of fraud or scam. So the impact can be it's devastating for a lot of people. 79% of victims of fraud scams experience a negative emotional impact. 46% of victims feel angry, 40% of victims feel stupid, and 38% of victims feel embarrassed. And the subsequent impact can compound and be significantly worse. So victims can experience feelings of low self-esteem, mental health issues, anxiety, or heartbreak. And Age UK have found that older people defrauded in their own home are 2.5 times more likely to either die or go into residential care within 2 years, in comparison to a person of a similar demographic who has not been a victim of fraud or scams. And very often our victims that we come into contact are generally, I would say, elderly females. They seem to be the person that is most likely impacted by fraud or scams, especially those. And when I'm saying that, I'm talking sort of from 75 up to 80s and 90s. It's very often that they're living alone. They may have a lack of family support around them. They may have onset of dementia or other um, you know uh, other illnesses, etc., that are impacting on them. So the tactics employed by perpetrators of fraud. So in many instances, fraud is a sophisticated crime. So criminals use various techniques to exploit victims. So they will employ manipulative language. So they use language often designed to manipulate, persuade, exploit, and distort people's perception of reality. For example, requests for money are often indirect and disguised as something different. And when not, the requests are made in such a way that it doesn't seem concerning to the person receiving it. So the victim of fraud can be making decisions that feel rational and reasonable. They may find it difficult to recognise the nature of the request or demands, however obvious it may seem to those on the outside. So take a romance fraud, for example. So romance fraud for me are the most devastating ones because not only is the person losing their money, but also they could potentially be losing what they perceive to be the love of their life. So romance fraud, very often the person will make contact with them and it will start off on a online site, for example, and very quickly it will go on to kind of WhatsApp messaging or something like that, more of an encrypted site. And then they will, very quickly it'll go to big declarations of love. Um, but they can't go and meet the person because they're living on an oil rig or they haven't got the funds or they've suddenly had some sort of bereavement or something that means they're unable to physically go and meet the person that they are declaring their undying love for and who genuinely believes that they are in a relationship with. And then the requests for money will start to come. So they will say, oh, well, if I need money because I need to get my car fixed to be able to come and see you, or I've had a bereavement and I really need some money so that I can travel to go to the funeral, or, I'm on an oil rig, but I haven't got any money to be able to get back. So, and come and see. So if you can just send me some money. And because over a period of time, they've manipulated, indoctrinated and groomed these people into believing that they are in a relationship with them, the money will then come. We've had one victim of romance fraud that gave the person that was extorting them money to buy their own birthday present for them, but the birthday present accidentally got lost in the post. So these people are incredibly sophisticated at what they do, and they're very, very good at establishing who they are going to get, who is vulnerable enough to be able to exploit essentially and get the money from. Um, you may have suddenly behaviour changes. So perpetrators of fraud are expert in using, as I said, befriending and grooming techniques to lure their victim. Often this is intended to create a relationship. Once the relationship is established, their behaviour can change tack quickly through moving from appearing legitimate, helpful, more persuasive, persistent, and aggressive. In a situation of coercive control, the victim will have been manipulated into being unable to see beyond the false reality that has been created. So the fraud or scam may have perpetuated over a significant period of time, and the victim may not be able to rationalise their actions. So it can go from being, this loving, caring, supportive person to suddenly being very demanding and aggressive and threatening if they don't provide them with the money that they want. And the person is in such a situation that they don't feel that they can get out of it. And very often they've been isolated and alienated from their families and friends, or their families and friends have said to them, this is a scam, this isn't right. But they are so groomed by the person by the criminal that they disbelieve their family, and the criminal has all the power to be able to exploit them. And so isolation. So criminals often seek to isolate the victim. so that the victims then feels they're unable to speak to or seek support from outside of their false reality, or a regular support network. So the hot versus cold state. Um, so the techniques and behaviours used by those who commit fraud and scams are designed to get the victim into a hot state. So in a hot state of mind, this is where our decisions are often driven by emotion and can be biased or considered suboptimal. The victims in a hot state may be more easily persuaded, and therefore make decisions that they may not have ordinarily made. So whereas an individual in a cold state, for example, may have made a different decision in the same set of circumstances, as their decision making is often more logical and less emotionally driven. So, for example, criminals work hard to make sure that when they ask for money, it may require urgency or secrecy from the victim. I really need this money now because I need, I need to pay for a medical bill, for example. I need it now, otherwise, I'm not going to be able to I'm not going to get the treatment that I need, or I need it now, otherwise, my family aren't going to be able to get what they need, or something like that. There's this urgency, or if you can give me this money, it's just between us. Don't let anybody else know. It's something special between me and you because we love each other so much, and we're going to be together forever. And this is going to enable us to be able to be together. And the requests such as these are disguised and can be hidden in stories that seem expected and reasonable. Such as I say, the clearly designed reluctant admission of health worries. And this creates a sense of desire to protect the friendship or relationship that they are in. And these visceral responses invoke fear or protective responses from the victim by making them feel responsible for the criminal's physical or emotional well-being. And emotional interpersonal withdrawal can be used to compel compliance with financial and other requests. So they will ghost people for a period of time if they don't get what they want. And if you're in a relationship, if you truly believe you're in a relationship with somebody, and then suddenly they're not making any contact with you, then they suddenly get back in touch. You're more likely to give them the money because well, actually, I need this relationship. I want this relationship so much. I'll give them the money to maintain this relationship. So, impact of language on victims. So research suggests that language we use is critical in how we support fraud and scam victims. So using the appropriate language is more likely to lead to more positive outcomes. So when communicating with a victim, always communicate in plain everyday English, because it helps obviously building up trust and understanding. And considering the language we use in terms of how we talk about fraud and scams can be very victim blaming, as I mentioned in the start. We can sometimes talk of being duped or tricked, something being too good to be true, or we ask the victim, how could you fall for that? And this sort of language can make a victim continue or start to feel stupid or unheard. And it can also result in secondary victimization. So, sort of post-crime victimization, and it refers to further victim blaming rather than support by the very people who should be trying to help. So it's so important when we're working with people who we think have been the victims of fraud or scams to use the appropriate language, because it shows an awareness and attempt of understanding their experience, and is more likely to build up that confidence in the victims, and more likely to build up that trust, that relationship, and that victim feeling able to tell their story, and hopefully bring the criminal basically to justice, and feel understood as well, that that they are being believed and understood. So how do we in the Public Protection Partnership prevent and support victims of fraud and scams? So we have a number of teams in the trading standards section of the Public Protection Partnership. So we have a specific team that work very much with our kind of national trading standards and our kind of national rogue traders and fraud and scams perpetrators. So we have a specific team that will go out and do, they're the ones that kind of bang down the doors and go in and you know, issue warrants and arrest people with the police and enforce the law around fraud and scams. We then have our trading standards officers that will deal with the more kind of low level fraud and scams, the more localized things. So maybe your kind of local road traders, your kind of dodgy dealers, for want of a better word, you know, where you go to a car dealership or you know, a provider within your local area and you kind of think, oh, that's you know, that doesn't seem quite right. They might not have provided me with the service I expected. And they deal with those ones and enforce the law in relation to, investigate and enforce the law in relation to those. And then we have ourselves within the victim support team, and we will go and see all the victims across West Berkshire, Wokingham and Bracknell Forest who have been who have been involved in a fraud or scam incident, and we will provide them advice, support and signposting opportunities to other agencies that may be able to support them. So we can install free call blockers. So we often get a lot of generally elderly residents, as they're generally the ones that still use a landline phone, that will be getting multiple calls a day that are scam calls. You know, these ones that are from the HMRC, the ones that are from the bank, the ones that are from their you know, their computer provider, or, you know, saying they've been in an accident that wasn't their fault, you know, all sorts of weird and wonderful things that they're being phoned up. You know, we have some that are getting 70-80% of the calls that they are receiving in a day are scam calls. And as people get older, as potentially, you know, they start on a dementia kind of journey, they start engaging in these calls and they start believing these calls and they start providing information to these people and money to these people. So what we can do is we can put a call blocker in where we've got a situation where somebody is at significant risk of losing money through scams via the phone or has already done so. And what the call blocker basically does is it bypasses all calls into the system where somebody has to press a button to be able to then get through to the person at the end of the line. We can register it so that, you know, phone calls from family, friends, doctors, social workers, etc. can bypass the call blocker system. But for those people that are ringing, that are trying, you know, that are doing it to scam them out of money, they will not get through that call blocker system. We deliver scams prevention presentations to local groups and council staff. So we go to things like women's institutes, church groups, neighbourhood watch groups, you know, any kind of group or provision that provides support across the 3 local authorities. We can go in and deliver a presentation around scams prevention. So it takes those in the presentation through the different types of scams, how to recognise them, what to do to try and keep themselves safe from them, and what we can do as a partnership if you know, somebody has been the victim of a scam or they feel that they are at risk of being. So in terms of referring for call blockers, we'll come on to referral pathways in a minute through to our team. So banking protocol. So banks should not give out people's money without going through some specific checks. I don't know whether any of you have done online banking. I've been having a garage conversion recently, and when I've tried to provide a large sum of money to my builder, for example, it will take you through a number of checks that I need to say, are you, or say to me, are you sure you want to give this amount of money? Who is this money going to? Are you sure you can lose this sort of money? What that is doing is the bank checking and putting the responsibility onto you as the customer, that if you send this money to that particular person, that you are responsible for doing that, and you've done your checks and balances, that this person is legitimate. If the bank don't do that, or it's felt that the bank have tried to do it but have not done it well enough, like for example the person that they felt has gone through that procedure has dementia, for example, or is making an unwise decision in relation to their money, then the bank should prevent that money from leaving their account. If they don't, and the money leaves, then what we can do within the public protection partnership is we can enact what's called the banking protocol, and that's where we attempt to recoup the monies back from the bank for the residents. If we can prove that the bank have been negligent in their duties under that protocol. And we've managed to get some extremely large sums of money back from banks to our residents. We've had I think we've had north of about £800,000 back to different residents, £34,000 for one, 50 something thousand pounds for another. We if we feel that banks have wrongfully allowed a resident's money to go to a scammer, we will make sure that we enact the banking protocol and try as we might to get that money back. We can facilitate the setting up of no cold calling zones. So a no cold calling zone is essentially a zone where rogue traders shouldn't knock. So essentially, or any trader, for example, so your Modern Milkman or your Anglian Windows or things like that. So essentially, what happens is a member of the member of the residents in that area will act as the coordinator. They will check that the residents within that area would like a zone set up. And then what we do is we provide them with no cold calling zone stickers for their doors. We put up signs around the entrance and exit points of that particular road or estate or cul-de-sac to say that it is a no cold calling zone. And we also have a no cold calling zone register, which is a public document which lists all the postcodes of what no cold calling zones are registered within our area. If then a trader decides to knock in a no cold calling zone and we're made aware of that by a member of one of the residents, which we very often are, then we will follow that up. So we will send that trader a letter. And if they are continually knocking within no cold calling zones, then we can look to put enforcement action in place to prevent them from being able to do that. Like we can do things like we can fine them or things like that to try and prevent them from going into those areas and knocking. We can also provide scams leaflets and, as I say, the door stopper stickers. So we have them for no cold calling zones. You can have a sticker that basically says, we don't want door knockers knocking at our door, but we can also provide them to residents generally who aren't part of a no cold calling zone. And we also have lots of leaflets and booklets and things like that, which very often we find older people like to have. They like to have something tangible. They like to have something that they can sit and read and look at that provides them with information about scams and fraud and what they can do to kind of self protect. We have a lot of dissemination of scams prevention communications through our social media platforms. So we have, Facebook. I don't think we have an X account anymore, but we have, and we put them through our local authorities, various communications as well. So we run certain campaigns across different times of the year, and we also will also endorse campaigns that are run by national trading standards or through citizens advice or things like that around scams and fraud awareness. We attend lots of public events, partnering with kind of Thames Valley Police or the Fire Brigade to promote the work that we do. So we do a lot of events across Bracknell Forest over the summer. We tend to go to all the different events that are happening there. We do a lot in Wokingham and West Berkshire too, and we will kind of set up a little stand and provide information, leaflets and stuff around what the whole of the Public Protection Partnership do, but also around what we do within our fraud and scams team. And if any of you are from the West Berkshire area, we're also very involved with the Let's Talks that Reese Lewis from the Building Communities Together team. We're attending a lot of those and working with residents in that way to deliver messages around fraud and scams prevention. And we attend and contribute to multi-agency meetings to help combat fraud together. So, if there's any kind of strategy meetings or meetings that are going on in relation to residents that we are working with, we can also attend those meetings to provide our information and input. So referral pathways into our service. So we get referrals from a number of different agencies. So we get them directly through the National Trading Standards. So it may be that it's a regional fraud or scam that is taking place, and we've had people that have come through to National Trading Standards in relation to it, and then they are kind of bounced back to us for that support. We get them from Citizens Advice. We get them through Thames Valley Police's multi-agency approach to fraud. So there'll be ones that have gone through to the police as a crime, and then they will refer them through to us for that support. We get them directly from Thames Valley Police or the PCSO's neighbourhood team. We get them from yourselves in adult social care. If you have a resident that you're working with that you consider could be at risk of being a victim of fraud and scams, or when you come to do your assessments, you find out actually there is something that's happened that you feel is a potentially that they have been a victim of fraud or scams, then you can refer them into ourselves, and we can take a look at that and we can offer help or support. And we often get self referrals or via our telephone or email, or referrals through from the other family of the residents or friends that are phoning us to say that they feel that their mother, their auntie or etc., or their friend has been a victim of this type of crime. And there's our contact details, our telephone number and our email address for referrals into the team. But we do also signpost to others for support. So we will also provide victims, provide details to the victims that we're working with around victim support, because they are a 24/7 helpline, similarly to Samaritans. And we may get support from Age UK or Citizens Advice around kind of rights and responsibilities that our victims may have. And we also we've had victims where we've referred them to the food bank, for example. We had a lady that had been involved in a TikTok scam. So she had thought that she could make money through, or she was led to believe that she could make money through watching adverts on TikTok. And she started doing it and she was paid some money, but then they said that she needed to pay money to them to be able to then get money back. And so she was in a situation where she doesn't have a lot of money. She's a single parent, young children. So she provided the money to this particular employer. And then she watched adverts, and then when she went to the account that they had said that they had set up for her, where her money would be, so the money that she had earned plus the money that she had invested, there was no money available. And when she then questioned the employer, they basically said that, well, the issues with you, that's not our fault. The issues with, there's obviously problems with the account and things, and then completely ghosted her. And now and basically shut down the company. So unfortunately she was left with no money. So we can directly refer into local food banks for support with that sort of issue as well. So I just want to give you a couple of real life case studies that we've worked with. So both of these, I've put a picture of an elderly woman on. It's not a great picture, but because they're both are elderly people that are real life case studies around elderly females. So the first one, EK, so she was a head teacher of a private girls' school originally, and she was in her 80s when we started working with her, and she had no family support. And she was targeted by an online investment scam originally, and she was groomed into investing large sums of money under the pretense that she would basically reap the benefits of this investment when she needed it to pay for her care, you know, when she got to that stage where she potentially need care. Then the scam kind of diversified into a romance scam, and Tony would need her money to get himself out of the different situations that he was in, you know, and this lady gave these people all of her money. We reckon north of £1 million she gave to this particular to Tony and the network that he was working within. So our fraud and victims officer at the time managed to get quite a lot of that money back in different stages through the banking protocol, because it was felt that she was, you know, this money was being given to her or was being allowed to go from her accounts without the proper checks and balances. However, when he would get the money back, she would just give the money back to Tony. And it was this vicious cycle, and we would put in call blockers in, we had spending caps put on her accounts, we had the bank accounts, you know, change, we had flags put on the accounts to say that, you know, she's a vulnerable customer, she's making unwise decisions, she needs to you know, there needs to be more kind of checks and balances around what she's doing with the money. But she was bypassing this because she had a car she could drive, and she was going to different branches, she was going to the post office, she was going all over to get money to send to Tony. As I said, she had no family. She had some friends who said that they would be an adult social care became involved in the case, and you know, the friends said that they would have responsibility for her money for her. That broke down very, very quickly because she would get very angry, aggressive towards her friends when they wouldn't give her the money that she wanted to give to Tony. And in the end, a deputyship was put in place by adult social care, and that finally stopped the cycle of her giving her money to Tony. And what was interesting about this case was, whilst our fraud and scam support worker was with her one time in the bank, she received a phone call on her mobile, and it was actually from the National Crime Agency. So our officer thought this can't be true, so took the phone from her, like with her permission, took the phone from her and sort of said, you know, hello, I'm so and so. Turned out he actually knew the person that he was speaking to, because he'd been in the role for quite a while and had dealings with them before, so he knew this was a legitimate call. And it actually turns out that that her details had been found by them during an investigation on a database that was being used by an organised crime group working out of Eastern Europe. So as we know, there was no Tony. This was a, you know, a very sophisticated, organised crime group that were basically targeting her and targeting probably many other people across the country through their fraudulent activity for their money. And with her, unfortunately, they managed to get, we believe, you know, around north of £1 million before, you know, we were able to put in all the mechanisms we could to prevent that from happening further. And then a couple that we're working with currently, so we've got M and J, so they're a couple in their 80s, and again they come from you know, very good you know, high powered jobs, you know, they're very, 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 you know, intelligent women, and live, you know, they live in a beautiful home, you know, and but how now, and now one of them has a diagnosis of dementia, and they're generally getting older, they're in their 80s. They have lasting power of attorney for each other, as they don't have any family. However, neither have been activated at the moment. And unfortunately, these ladies have been victims of road traders for years. I can remember going around their house 2 years ago and preventing them from spending £18,000 on having their driveway pressure washed. And they thought they'd got a good deal because they'd managed to bring the price down from £18,000 to £16,000. So they make very, very unwise decisions, unfortunately, with their money. And it was around road traders. So they would have people turn up on their door. They would say that they would do, that they noticed, I don't know, that some of their roof tiles were a little bit dodgy. Do you want us to go and check them? We can do it now. And then suddenly it would be costing them £40,000 for a whole new roof, and they would be paying out that sort of money, huge sums of money. So as I say, we've worked with them on and off for a few years, and we've tried to put things in place, and then it's kind of, but they've never really agreed to work with us in any kind of big way, by putting in real kind of ways of them stopping this from happening. So recently, however, they've had they've had a friend that's got involved who's a neighbour, and they've also had a lot of sums of money going out of their accounts. We reckon in the last couple of years, probably about £150,000. And they seem to have reached a stage where they're realizing that actually maybe they do need some help and support to combat this and to deal with this. So things that we've done, so they had these solar panels installed, and that seems to be the main thing. So when they had these solar panels installed, it appears that their details have basically been sold on a black market to other fraud and scams people, and they are being continuously contacted by these traders alleging that they need work done, or saying, oh, can we come and have a look at doing some work for you? We'll quote you for it. They come out, they quote them for it, they do the work, but the work is either substandard or they do half the work. So we've changed their telephone number. We've taken them off the electoral register. We've had safe and well checks done by the fire service to ensure the work that's been undertaken by these traders, what has been done, is safe, even if it's not to a good standard. And in the last, and we've managed to get them to agree to have a spending cap on their money, so they can no longer allow large sums of money to leave their bank account. And we've also, within the last month, managed to stop them giving over £20,000 out to 2 road traders who have targeted the ladies whilst we've been involved. One of them actually phoned them and became extremely aggressive and told them that they were going to send people round to their house if they didn't give them money. So one of my victim officers ended up around their house for a considerable period of time waiting for the police to arrive. And obviously this person didn't arrive to get the money, but just to kind of help the ladies and ensure their safety. We've got the local neighbourhood police teams. They're on their task in briefings now, so they're going round and checking in on them every so often to make sure that these ladies aren't having people turning up at their address to try and do work that doesn't require doing. And we're also looking at work in adult social care involved, and they're also looking at assessments around deputyships in relation to their money, because it's considered that they're making unwise decisions in relation to that. So my last slide is just some key takeaways. So the perpetrators of fraud and scams, they are criminals. They use sophisticated techniques to target, manipulate, and often coerce and control victims. And the language we use when we're talking to victims is really important. So it should be positive, supportive, and understanding, and not intention. And we're not there to unintentionally make victims feel stupid, shamed, or unheard by using terms like fool for, fooled, or duped. And lastly, victims of fraud and scams, they sometimes need significant multi-agency support, and they're going through a trauma, and how you respond can significantly improve the likelihood of a positive outcome. Thank you very much for your time. I'm going to end my slideshow, and if you have any questions, we've got about 7 minutes left. Oh, you're on mute, Marcia.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jessica. That was a great presentation. I've learnt loads from what you've had to say. I don't know if anybody does have any questions. I know the one thing that I was wondering, you mentioned the 3 local authorities, but you don't
Yes.
cover Reading, do you? You cover the west
No.
of Berkshire, and you cover Wokingham within
Yes, and we cover Bracknell.
and you cover
Yes.
Bracknell. Is there a similar service for Reading?
There is not at the moment. However,
Okay.
I do have close liaison with Reading colleagues, and I believe now that they're aware that we've used the Office of Police and Crime Commissioners funds to fund this piece of work, I think they are looking at doing something similar. It may take some time, but I know there is funding. There is funding available from the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner for these type of services. They just need to put in a bid basically to their local authorities, community safety partnership, and see if it gets through. Because I know it's an area that they are keen to look at doing, because obviously all around them this piece of
Yeah.
work is being doing, so it makes sense if they did it too.
Yeah, perfect. So in terms of people in Reading, what route could they take in order to get that additional support for people?
I think it would have to be through things like Age UK, Citizens Advice, and victim support. They will get the trading standards service work. So if they have, they have had a scam or fraud, they will get that kind of investigation enforcement. What they wouldn't get is that then the additional support that we do. They wouldn't get the regular home visits. They're going to have a cup of tea and ask them their story and that kind of additional support to try and prevent them from being them being re-victimized basically.
Okay,
Also they don't get that preventative work, so those presentations that we go out and do, that kind of community engagement work as well, so that doesn't take place in Reading, is my understanding.
okay. But there is still support there.
But there is still support if people have been victim, to kind of to investigate and enforce those crimes.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Jessica, for your time this morning. And I hope that you've all taken a lot away